Oh, can I have some?
And now we're moving into our Ta Loca Es, where we call motherfuckers out for doing the most. Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico, Puerto Rico. So they finally received the $16 billion in funding, federal funding for disaster relief. However, there have been a shit ton of stipulations that have been placed upon this. They have to create a proposed budget first as to how they're going to be spending all of these funds, so that the money can be tracked. They also cannot pay the $15 an hour minimum wage that people get paid in federally funded projects. They also are not allowed to use the money. They're
I'm sorry. How does that fucking make sense?
I got two more for you.
Federally funded wage. Where does that, how does that make sense?
Oh, y'all not allowed to pay people with what they should be.
Everybody else is supposed to be promised.
Mind you, 15, and we all know.
What kind of Jim Crow fuckery is that?
And we all know 15 isn't enough to begin with. And not only that, they can't use the funding on the electrical grid system, which right now, obviously, electrical grid is important. In a moment like this, the whole island was on blackout, yada, yada, yada. But they can't use it because apparently there was $2 billion that had already been allocated, but they still haven't even gotten that money to start working on it from Maria. So it's all kind of fucked up. And, White House officials acknowledge that there's electrical issues on the island. However, they really don't think that they need to be releasing any sort of extra funding outside of what they've already promised.
Well,
I don't understand that.
To be fair, if I was the White House and I gave you $2 million? $2 billion?
Well, $2 billion, but they still haven't gotten the $2 billion.
If I put that out there and that shit disappeared, fair, I'm going to be like, nah, we're not spending it on that. But what I want to talk about is when are we voting out these corrupt motherfuckers? Because I don't care if you're going to give me $16 billion in funding. If we are not voting out the people that are abusing and creating the debt and impacting this crisis further, it doesn't matter how much funding you give us, the corruption is still there. Todavía está podrido.
Right.
So,
and
we gotta cut the tree down. The root is fucking rotten.
Shouldn't that be the first place that you look? If all this money is going missing, shouldn't the first people that get penalized are the people that are in charge rather than the people who are suffering from these natural disasters that they have no control over? And then also, not even to say anything, but before these natural disasters, the island wasn't in a good state anyway.
Right.
So even if it wasn't for the earthquakes and if it wasn't for Maria, they were still struggling.
Right. And which is to your point of it's about the corruption. And to be clear, the $2 billion, it's not even that it's missing. They just haven't even given us the shit. It's we know that there's an issue, but they haven't released the funds. Once the earthquakes happen, the fact that the funds just got released and it was over 2 weeks from the first earthquake that hit is ridiculous. If this was in and mind you, I'm saying in U.S. soil as though Puerto Rico is not U.S. soil, but let's assume that in the world, the minds of people who don't fucking know anything about this country and how commonwealths work, right? Let's assume they don't consider that American soil. Any one of our 50 states, something like that happened. You think they would have waited 2 weeks to release some fucking funds for emergency relief? Absolutely not.
No. I mean, only if those neighborhoods were covered with brown people.
Yeah. Potentially, but even with because when we look at Katrina, right, the way aid was given during that crisis was also super problematic and had a lot of stipulations to it. But the fact that there is even a level below that can exist, a way in which you can treat someone worse during a disaster, and it is U.S. territory that we choose to have, mind you, it's not like Puerto Rico and all its history was please, what happens is over time. Then, the island sort of splits on well, do we want to integrate with the states or don't we want to integrate? There's a huge dialogue that happens. And in moments like this, it's...
Well, so if we integrate, can we get our $15 an hour?
Right.
To do a fucking federally funded project.
And it's quite ridiculous, and it really puts a divide on the island and the pressure on the island.
It does.
But it takes the responsibility off of people who can, U.S. citizens. Again, they're also U.S. citizens. I just want to clarify. They're completely U.S. citizens, but for some reason, this separation mentality has allowed not only the government to fully take advantage, but our voting citizens here don't ever think about what's happening on that island as part of their responsibility because they don't think of it as part of our country.
And on that, I'm just going to correct those voting citizens who don't think it's part of their responsibility to remind them that people on the island do not get to vote for the president.
Right.
Do not get to vote for their best interests because they are not a state. So they do not get to vote on the agendas that impact them. Yet people up in Washington feel it's in their power to decide what they are and are not worth. Mm-hmm. If that's the way this is going to go, release the island and leave them. Let them be dirt, broken, poor on their own. We're talking about the oldest existing colony in the whole world. It is the island of Puerto Rico.
Yep.
It's not any other place in the world. I'm talking since the days of the Taínos.
Yeah.
We're talking about the 1400s.
Yeah.
Since the Spanish, following the U.S., this island has not seen their freedom. I mean,
ever.
Could you imagine what that does to the psyche of a Puerto Rican mentality?
Right.
To assume all this is normal.
Right.
To assume that on February 1st, if you just throw a big party, you have your Renew Year, that it's going to make the problems go away.
And it doesn't. Yeah. Yeah. It's really problematic. And I think that even down to how they teach about Puerto Rico in schools, where, hint, hint, they don't. Right.
They don't.
That is how they teach it, is they don't. And so you don't really have a deep understanding. And I even to take it back to this unspoken, the fake Dominican Puerto Rican rivalry, because it's really
so
fake at
Look
the
at
root
us.
of it.
No.
Right. We're like this, but that fakeness really came from just your immigration policy is different from my immigration policy. And so from a Dominican perspective, it's like, damn, we got to fight, tooth and nail, and we got to wait years and years. Y hay que pedir esta y pedir el otro in order to try to get into this country. And by the way, Trump is also working to make sure that now part of your getting a citizenship means that they get to go into your financials. And if you're not a financially stable person, they can deny you citizenship to the United States of America.
Wow.
Because that will imply that you're probably going to apply for food stamps, Medicaid, and all that shit. And so that since they don't want people to do
we
that,
don't want poor people.
we don't want poor people.
I'm sorry.
We
Nobody's
don't want poor
applying.
people.
Disculpa. Nobody's applying for food stamps, but middle class Americans in rural America that are starved, living in food deserts, making below minimum wage. Right. Those are the people that need the help from their government, not hardworking Latinos who only know how to work.
Right, right. And I hate the way they change the narrative of people who are here undocumented, acting like they're the ones sucking all these aids when they don't qualify for half the shit. Qualify. Right. And so the face of government aid has always been black and brown, but the biggest recipients have always been white. And so when we going back to Puerto Rico and going back to this aid for a natural disaster, which is not, these people are lazy, these people don't want to do this, bootstraps, none of that shit. It's y'all motherfuckers don't want to hold your corporations accountable, thus climate change, thus tectonic plates moving, thus earthquakes on Puerto Rico, and then Jamaica, by the way, which also happened, right? You know what I mean? And this seismic activity will continue to happen. You know what I mean? And all of this is a result of your greed. Right? It's all, and so the cycle, when you really break it down in that way, it to me is the most infuriating thing to watch and to have to participate in. And participate in the sense of we are working on a relief benefit for Puerto Rico for the earthquakes, right? And so why are we doing that? Because if people aren't doing something, I can't idly sit by as a citizen who has all this information and just let the shit play itself out. I feel the need to activate, but then in reality, and it's not that I wouldn't activate anyway, but I shouldn't have to activate as hard as I'm activating because the resources should just be there. They should just be available to these people, and I should just be able to be let me do a little something extra. They got mad money, but here's a little extra. Let me just send a little care packages with letters because they got all the money and aid they need, but they need a little love. So let me just send some love, right? And now it's I want to send some love, but also a pack of water, some money for this organization because they need so much.
And stuff like that, a pack of water, simple survival shit.
Yeah. Means so much right now. Yeah. Yeah.
The fact that people don't trust the government.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that you have people shipping things to physically bring them to the towns.
Well, also, let's put a pause on that. Because we are not an independent country, everything has to pass through the United States. So we would actually be receiving aid and assistance from our neighboring Latino brothers and sisters a lot faster if we were our own country.
Yeah.
Just like when natural disasters hit other countries of the Latin diaspora, we help one another. Cuba sends their doctors. Other countries send aid, water, you name it. We run to help one another. We don't have that luxury because everything must bypass the United States first, which is why aid gets to us even slower.
Right.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
It's fucked up.
So what do you, if you, Megan, just like in your experience, like if you had some advice for Boricuas here in New York City that are wanting to be supportive, especially those who, you know, are a few generations removed and don't necessarily have that same close relationship with the island where they can be like, oh, my abuela lived there. Some have never been there, but they feel moved to participate in some sort of way. What are the different ways you would encourage people to participate in supporting the island?
I think it's really important to find ways to put, and we briefly touched on this during our pre-Bronche discussion, we have to figure out ways to put money back into our community. I'm not going to be the person to tell people how they should or should not behave or feel connected to something. We connect to the diaspora in our own way.
Right.
The diaspora exists not by our choice. So I don't think it's appropriate for me to sort of pressure people. Nobody owes anyone anything. But if people felt like they wanted to help in some way, that could look like many different things, whether going back to contribute to organizations, investing in property before it gets sold to outsiders. That's going to be a real issue soon. But yeah, putting money back into the pool. And we see this in other communities all around the globe.
Yep.
You know, the Jewish diaspora is a real thing. And it remains strong no matter where in the world. You can go to Argentina, you can go to Mexico City, you can come to the United States. And those the Armenian diaspora is so powerful. Look at LA, Iran.
Yep.
You go to any country and these diasporas, you know, they feed their communities so that they can thrive. And I would love to see members of the diaspora come together to make that happen. Like, whether it means creating jobs for each other, employing one another, small businesses that are owned by one another, contributing and funding those. I would love to see that shift happen in any capacity.